Flavia Vitalia sold a grave plot in Salona in the year 425, and the buyer cut the receipt into the stone. 3 gold solidi paid to Flavia Vitalia, holy matron presbytera. Presbytera, the feminine of presbyteros, the word your English Bible turns into priest. She was not alone. And whatever you have been told about women priests in the early church is wrong. By the end you will know what these women were, and why the split between Catholic, Orthodox and Protestant Christians runs through that stone. 2 confident answers are in circulation. Here they are. The first says no, obviously not. The whole idea is a modern invention smuggled backwards into a church that never had it. The second says yes, obviously yes, and the institution spent 1,000 years quietly scraping the evidence off the walls. Here is the trouble with both. They answer a question the sources are not asking. Before we get to the question the sources are asking, one fact has to sit on the table, because everything else rests on it. Between the 4th century and the 6th, church councils in Asia Minor, in Gaul, in Italy and in Sicily banned women from ordination and from the altar. Repeatedly, in different regions, in different languages, across roughly 400 years. And you do not spend 400 years banning something nobody is doing. Picture a sign nailed to a tree on a riverbank. No swimming. That sign tells you nothing about the river. It tells you about people. Nobody hammers that board into a trunk beside water that no one ever enters. Now walk the same bank and find 4 signs, from 4 different generations, each one newer than the last, each worded more sharply than the one before. You have stopped reading signage. You are reading a record of swimmers. That is what the canons are. And the men who wrote them make the best witnesses we have, precisely because they had no interest whatsoever in telling us that women were serving at altars. Start with the word itself, because the word is a trap. English uses 1 syllable, priest, to carry 2 completely unrelated Greek ones. The first is hieros. A hieros is a sacrificer. He stands at an altar, he kills something or burns something, he mediates between a god and a people. That word sits behind the Hebrew Kohen, behind the temple in Jerusalem, behind every pagan shrine in the Mediterranean. The second is presbyteros. It simply means an older man, an elder, a senior. Nothing sacred attaches to it at all. A Greek merchant could use it about his uncle. Our English word descends from the second one and only by sound. Presbyteros became the Latin presbyter, which wore down in Germanic mouths to prester, then to the Old English priost, then to priest. The sacrificial word travelled a separate road. Hiereus became the Latin sacerdos, then the Old English sacerd, which fell out of use in the Middle Ages and left nothing behind but the adjective sacerdotal. So the English word priest is an elder wearing a sacrificer's coat. The coat was borrowed later. Now the detail almost nobody hears from a pulpit. Across the Christian scriptures, hiereus is never once applied to a Christian minister. The word appears more than 30 times. It describes Jewish temple priests, pagan priests, Melchizedek, Jesus himself, and the whole baptized people together. Never a single office holder in a single congregation. Sacrificial vocabulary arrives later. You can watch it turn up in Tertullian and in Cyprian, in North Africa across the late 2nd and 3rd centuries, applied first to bishops, and then, by extension, downward to the elders serving under them. Which means the question in the title carries a landmine. If priest means hiereus, a man who offers sacrifice at an altar, then for the 1st century and a half the church had no male priests either. It had elders, overseers, and servants. I will take a position, and it is not the comfortable one for anybody. This argument has run for 50 years without resolving because the 2 sides are not actually disagreeing. They are answering different questions. One camp asks whether women held office in the early churches, and the sources answer, yes, loudly, in several forms. The other camp asks whether women consecrated the Eucharist as a sacrificing priesthood, and the sources answer almost nothing at all, because that category was still under construction. Both camps then declare victory and go home. So let us ask a better question. Not what were women called, but what were they doing, and who laid hands on them to do it. Begin where the paper trail begins, in a letter Paul dictated around the year 57, to a church he had never visited. The final chapter of Romans is a list of greetings. Also, accidentally, the richest personnel document to survive from the first Christian generation. 10 women are named in it. 2 of them should stop you. Phoebe comes first. Romans 16 verse 1 calls her diakonos of the church at Cenchreae, the eastern port of Corinth. Diakonos is the word we render deacon, and Paul uses the masculine form of the noun about her, because in the 1st century no feminine form existed to use. The office had not yet grown a separate word for women. Notice what she is not called. Not a deacon among the women. Not a servant of the sisters. Deacon of a named congregation. And she is the only person in the whole of the Christian scriptures described that way. The next verse adds a second word, prostatis. Translations soften it into helper or patron or benefactor, and patron is defensible since the masculine equivalent describes a legal protector who stands in front of a client. But the root is a standing before word. Whatever else Phoebe was, she was not standing behind. One more thread runs alongside her. When Paul lists the qualifications for deacons, he breaks off mid-list to address women likewise, in 1 Timothy 3 verse 11, and then returns to the deacons. Grammatically, that could mean deacons' wives. Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Chrysostom all read it as women deacons. Origen, commenting on Phoebe in the 3rd century, put it about as plainly as it can be put. The Apostles' authority teaches that women too are appointed deacons in the church. Then there is Junia. Romans 16 verse 7 greets Andronicus and Junia, Paul's kinsfolk and fellow prisoners, and calls them noteworthy among the apostles. For roughly 1200 years, every commentator who touched that verse read Junia as a woman. John Chrysostom, Archbishop of Constantinople, dead in the year 407, exclaimed over it in a homily, "How great this woman's devotion must have been, that she was counted worthy of the name apostle." Origen read her as a woman. Jerome read her as a woman. The Latin, the Syriac, and the Coptic translations all render a woman's name. Here is where it gets strange, and this is a matter of manuscripts rather than opinion. Ancient Greek was written without accent marks. The name in the text is spelled Ionian, and the accent alone decides its sex. Put the stress one way and you have Junia, a woman. Put it the other way and you have Junias, a man. When scribes finally began adding accents to these manuscripts, from around the 7th century onward, they wrote the feminine. Meanwhile, the masculine name has a different problem. It does not exist. The woman's name Junia turns up over 250 times in Greek and Latin inscriptions, from the city of Rome alone. The man's name Junias is unattested anywhere in the ancient world, in any document, in any inscription. It had to be reverse-engineered as a hypothetical shortening of Junianus. The earliest named author known to have called this person male was Giles of Rome, an Augustinian theologian who lived from 1245 to 1316. A printed edition of the Greek switched to the masculine accent in 1927, and most English Bibles followed for the next 50 years. Now, honesty requires the counterweight, because one exists. The Greek phrase translated among the apostles can also be read as known to the apostles, which would make Junia famous in apostolic circles rather than an apostle herself. That reading is a minority position, and a strained one. But nobody fabricated it, and any presentation that hides it is selling you something. What cannot be argued is the sex of the name. Junia was a woman, and the Church knew it for 12 centuries. Set the Christians aside for a moment, because the next witness has no stake in any of this. Around the year 112, a Roman senator named Pliny the Younger was governing the province of Bithynia and Pontus, on the Black Sea coast of what is now Turkey. He had never presided at a trial of Christians and did not know the procedure, so he wrote to the Emperor Trajan for instructions. Midway through that report he mentions without emphasis that in order to establish the facts he had 2 enslaved women tortured. He identifies them by the title their own community used. In his Latin, they were the ones who were called ministrae. Ministra is the ordinary Latin rendering of diakonos. Consider what that sentence is and is not. Not Christian advertising, no bishop flattering his patroness. A Roman provincial governor, in a confidential dispatch to his emperor, reaching for the 2 people whose position in the congregation would make them worth interrogating, and finding 2 women. The cautious footnote belongs in the honest version of this argument. Ministra was not yet a locked technical term in Latin, and it could carry a looser sense of attendant. Some scholars press exactly that point, but when a Roman official went looking for a cult's officials, he took hold of 2 women, and the church he was investigating had handed them a title. Now move east, and watch a definite office take shape. By the 3rd century, a Syrian church manual known as the Didascalia instructs the bishop to appoint a woman for the ministry to women. The reason given is practical and physical. Baptism in that period meant full immersion of adults, unclothed, with anointing of the whole body. A male minister could not decently perform that on a woman, so a woman had to. She also went where a male deacon could not go, into the houses of pagan husbands, to the sick, to women, who would never have opened a door to a man. Come the 4th century, this is no longer improvisation. There is an order, and there is a rite. The compilation called the Apostolic Constitutions preserves a prayer for laying hands on a deaconess, and it reaches back into the Hebrew scriptures for precedent. Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Huldah, and the women who kept the doors of the tabernacle. The Council of Chalcedon in 451, one of the great ecumenical councils, the one that defined how the divine and human natures meet in Christ, legislated about these women in Canon 15. No woman was to receive the laying on of hands as a deacon before the age of 40. Read the shape of that sentence. It does not argue about whether hands should be laid on women. It regulates the minimum age at which they may be. An ecumenical council assumes the practice. Fairness demands the counterweight here too, and this one is serious because it is the text most often produced against everything I have just said. The Council of Nicaea in 325 dealt in Canon 19 with converts arriving from a schismatic group, the followers of Paul of Samosata. Their deaconesses, it says, having received no laying on of hands, are to be numbered among the laity. One reading takes that as a flat declaration that deaconesses were never ordained anywhere. Another reading, and the Greek allows it, has the council saying that these particular deaconesses, from this particular sect, never received a valid laying on of hands, and so cannot be received as clergy the way properly ordained ones would be. The text is ambiguous. The scholarship is divided. Anyone who tells you the meaning is obvious in either direction is reading their conclusion into a difficult sentence. What settles very little is worth saying plainly. Canon 19 is the single strongest card in the traditional hand. And it is a card that can be played from both sides of the table. We know some of these women by name. Olympias of Constantinople, born about 365, dead in 408, was a widow of enormous wealth, who was ordained deacon by the Patriarch Nectarius and became the closest ally John Chrysostom had. 17 of his letters to her survive. When he was driven into exile, he called her and 3 other deaconesses to him for a final word, and asked them not to abandon the church. The Emperor Justinian in the 6th century was legislating staff numbers for the great church of Constantinople, Hagia Sophia. His decree set 60 priests, 100 deacons, and 40 deaconesses, 40, on the payroll of the most important church in Christendom. Which brings us to the document that makes this properly difficult, and I mean difficult for everyone. There survives a Byzantine prayer book, copied around the year 780, the oldest complete witness we have to the Eastern liturgy. It contains a rite for making a deaconess, and that rite can be laid side by side, line for line, against the rite for making a deacon. Greek has 2 words for laying on hands. Chirothesia is the lesser one, a blessing, used for readers and subdeacons and minor appointments. Charitonia is the greater one, used for ordaining bishops, priests, and deacons. The Eastern Church still uses it today for a sacramental ordination. The rite for the deaconess is headed Charitonia. It goes further. The candidate is brought inside the sanctuary behind the screen, at the altar. Only 4 ordinations in the Byzantine rite happen inside that space: bishop, priest, deacon, deaconess. Everything else takes place outside it. The bishop performs the rite during the Eucharist itself, after the great prayer of consecration, at exactly the point where a deacon would be ordained. He declares the formula reserved for major orders. He lays his hand on her head. He places the deacon's stole upon her. He hands her the chalice, and there the 2 rites finally part. The male ordinand kneels. She bows her head. He takes the chalice and distributes communion. She takes the chalice and places it back on the holy table. That difference is real, and it is not a footnote. It is precisely where the modern argument lives. Think of 2 keys cut on the same machine, from the same blank, with the same teeth, except for the very last notch. Hold them up and you can tell instantly that they came out of the same shop. What you cannot tell, by looking, is which door each one opens. So, my second position stated carefully. The claim that women were never ordained in the early church does not survive contact with the sources. The form is an ordination, and the Eastern Church's own liturgical books say so in the Eastern Church's own technical vocabulary. But the claim that this makes her a priest does not survive either. She never presided, she never consecrated. She handed the cup back. The honest disagreement is not about whether hands were laid, it is about what that last notch on the key was for. Now go west, where the story runs in the opposite direction, and where the evidence is loudest precisely because it is hostile. At Nîmes in southern Gaul, in the last decade of the 4th century, a synod complains that women appear to have been admitted, contrary to apostolic order, to what it calls Levitical ministry, and orders the ordinations undone. At Orange in 441, 17 bishops meeting under Hilary of Arles produced Canon 26. 4 Latin words, diakonae omnimodis non ordinandae. Women deacons are by no means to be ordained. And then the telling clause, if any already exist, let them bow their heads for the blessing given to the laity. Sit with that sentence a moment. It abolishes no theory. It demotes specific living women by instructing them where to stand during a blessing. Clergy stood on one side, the people stood on the other. Move. At Epaone in 517, the consecration of widows who are called deaconesses was abolished outright. At the Second Council of Orleans, in 533, the diaconal blessing was withdrawn from women altogether, on the stated grounds of the frailty of their condition. 4 councils, 4 generations, 4 signs on the same riverbank. Then comes the sharpest witness of all, and he is a pope. Gelasius I held the See of Rome from 492 to 496. On the 11th of March, 494, he sent a letter of 27 decrees to all the bishops of Lucania, Bruttium, and Sicily, the Arch and the Toe of Italy, and the island beyond. Decree 26 is 4 lines of pure exasperation. He has heard, to his annoyance, that divine matters have sunk so low that women are being encouraged to serve at the sacred altars, and to perform every function assigned to the male sex to which they do not belong. Then he does something revealing. He does not blame the women, he lays the guilt on the clergy who permit it, or who permit it by staying quiet. No version of that letter exists in which nothing is happening. A bishop of Rome does not write 27 decrees to 3 provinces about an imaginary problem. And he certainly does not accuse his own clergy of collusion in it. Which returns us to the stones, and to the part where I have to disappoint everybody a little. Other stones carry the same title. From Tropea in Calabria, late in the 5th century, a tombstone reads, Leta the presbytera lived 40 years, 8 months and 9 days. Her husband set it up. From Cenchreae in Sicily, here lies Cael, presbytis, who lived 50 years blamelessly. From the Basilica of Augustine at Hippo in North Africa, a mosaic medallion, Julia Runa, presbyterissa, rest in peace. Now the discipline. Some of the evidence usually stacked on this pile does not belong there. Inside the church of Santa Prasedia in Rome, a 9th century mosaic labels a woman Theodora Episcopa, Theodora the bishop. She gets produced constantly as proof of women bishops. She was the mother of the reigning pope, Paschal I, and the title is almost certainly honorific. Retire that one. The argument on the other side has weak timber in it too, and it deserves the same treatment. People say flatly that presbytera always means the wife of a presbyter. In later Greek usage it does exactly that. In Orthodox parishes today that is how you address the priest's wife. A real meaning, and quite possibly the right reading of some of these stones. It cannot be the right reading of all of them, and Flavia Vitalia is why. Selling burial plots was not something a clergyman's spouse did. In Rome, where we understand the system best, that transaction passed from the gravediggers to the overseers and then to the presbyters. It belonged to the office. A man bought consecrated ground from her, paid her, and recorded it in stone with the title attached. Whatever the abbreviation on that lid stands for, and it really can be resolved either way, which is the most cited objection in the scholarship, a woman was transacting the business of the presbyterate, considerably less than a woman consecrating the Eucharist. Considerably more than nothing. One more witness, and he is my favourite, because he is not arguing with anybody. He is answering a question. Atto was Bishop of Vercelli in northern Italy from 924 until his death in 961, and he was no marginal figure. He served as Grand Chancellor to 2 kings of Italy, and spent his career attacking corruption among the clergy. A priest named Ambrose wrote to him with a straight query. The old canons keep using these words, presbytera and diakona. What do they mean? Are these women the wives of clergy, or are they clergy? Atto's reply survives in Latin. He does not hedge, and he does not panic. In the primitive church he writes, the harvest was great and the labourers few, and so religious women too were ordained. Not only men but also women presided over the churches. Those called presbytera took up the office of preaching, of directing, and of teaching. Those called deaconesses took up the office of ministering and of baptizing. He explains why. Women could approach pagan women far more easily, and decency demanded a woman at the baptism of an adult woman. Then he explains why it stopped in a single clause with no theology in it at all. All of this, he says, is now no longer expedient, because the people are baptized as infants. Read that again. A 10th century Catholic bishop asked directly, says the office existed, says what it did, and attributes its disappearance not to doctrine but to a change in practice. He is not alone. A pontifical from Michael, Patriarch of Antioch in the 12th century, records the same explanation from the other side of the divide. In ancient times, deaconesses were ordained. Their function was to attend women so they need not uncover themselves before the bishop. And when baptism came to be given to infants, the function was abolished. 2 churchmen, 2 traditions, 2 centuries apart, giving the same answer, which produces my third position, and this is the one that will annoy the most people. The office did not die of theology, it died of plumbing. While adults were being baptized naked in cold water, the church needed women at the font. So it ordained them and paid them and seated them with the clergy. When infant baptism became universal, the visible reason for the office evaporated, and the office went with it. The West, which moved to infant baptism earlier and harder, lost it first. The East, which kept adult converts arriving for centuries longer, kept the rite in its service books until the 14th century. Theological arguments came afterwards to explain a change that was already complete. None of that is a cynical reading of church history. That was what the 2 bishops standing closest to the change said was happening. So look at where all of this landed, because the 3 traditions inherited the same evidence and did 3 different things with it. Rome closed the priesthood definitively in 1994 and has kept the diaconate open as a question ever since. 2 papal commissions have studied it. Their second commission reported in December of last year in a letter released at the direction of Pope Leo. The vote was 7-1. The current state of research excludes proceeding, though it stopped short of a final judgment and called for further study. In March, a synodal study group added that the question is not yet ripe. Meanwhile, the Maronite Church, in full communion with Rome, already has canon law permitting it. The Orthodox never abolished the order at all. It simply fell into disuse. The Church of Greece voted to revive it in 2004. The Patriarchate of Alexandria voted unanimously to restore it in 2016. And on Holy Thursday, the 2nd of May 2024, in a mission parish outside Harare in Zimbabwe, Metropolitan Seraphim laid hands on angelic Molen using the ancient Byzantine rite. The congregation shouted, "Axia, she is worthy." 2 days later, she was elevated to archdeaconess and took the additional name Phoebe. That was the first ordination of a deaconess in Eastern Orthodoxy in something close to 1,000 years. It happened in Africa for the reason the sources always gave: adult converts and women who needed a woman. Protestant traditions, for the most part, dissolve the question by dissolving the category. If there is no sacrificing priesthood, only a preached word and the priesthood of all believers, then the argument about who may stand at an altar has nothing left to stand on. Which is why the Reformation churches that did ordain women mostly did it on grounds Galasius would have found unintelligible, and why the ones that still do not mostly argue from Paul rather than from the councils. 3 traditions, 1 body of evidence, 3 incompatible conclusions. Now step all the way back. 2,000 years is long enough for a word to change its meaning twice. Presbyteros meant an old man, then a church officer, then a man who offers sacrifice, and finally, in English, a syllable that no longer sounds like any of them. The women in this story were standing in the doorway while the word was being rebuilt around them, which is why we cannot agree about what they were. They were not standing in our categories. Our categories had not been poured yet, and the men who wanted them gone are the reason we know they were there. Not 1 canon was written to preserve a memory. Not 1 bishop set out to leave us evidence. Galasius wrote in irritation. The bishops at Orange wrote in correction. Every one of them, in the act of shutting a door, recorded that somebody had been standing in it. That is worth carrying out of this, whichever tradition you walked in with. The record of the early church is not a clean line. It is an argument, preserved by the people who thought they had won it. You do not spend 400 years banning something nobody is doing. So the honest answer to the question is neither yes nor no. Women held ordained office in the early church, in an order the East ordained at the altar and the West suppressed by decree. What the sources will not tell us is whether the church of the first 5 centuries thought a woman could stand where a priest stands. Because the church of the first 5 centuries had not finished deciding what a priest was, Flavia Vitalia sold a grave plot in the year 425. A man carved her title into the lid, and then he buried someone in it, and the stone sat in the ground for 1,500 years waiting for us to argue about it. She is not going to settle this for us, but she is still here, and the councils are still here, and the rite is still in the books. If you know an inscription, a canon, or a liturgical text I have not accounted for here, put it in the comments with the citation rather than the conclusion. This is a question where the sources keep arriving, and I would rather be corrected than comfortable.